The initial sensation that registered when Stellan Vance regained awareness was a scorching agony from his ribs, a persistent clamor similar to an infuriated drill sergeant. His next observation was the profound stillness, a deeper quiet than mere lack of noise. It was a chilling sensation that prickled his skin and activated every defensive reflex. He had navigated 3 colonial conflicts, 17 deployment drops, and a particularly unfortunate skirmish at Triton Station's bar. He was intimately familiar with the hush that precedes violence. His eyes immediately opened. A colossal pale blue moon dominated the sky, bathing the terrain in a spectral luminescence that made the violet sand beneath him sparkle like pulverized amethysts. 300 meters behind him, the charred remains of the patrol craft Ironwood smoked. Its hull was fractured, resembling an egg smashed from orbit, which Stellan reflected with bitter irony was an accurate summary of events. One moment he was executing a routine surveillance mission along the outer perimeter, the next a gravitational distortion of some kind had seized his vessel like a clenched fist and hurled it towards this desolate planet. He forced himself upright onto his knees, disregarding the painful protests of his injured body. His tactical uniform was ripped, the material scored by shrapnel, and his white garment underneath was stained with a substance that could have been blood or engine fluid. Most likely both. His sidearm holsters were still secured to his waist, but one weapon was missing and the other felt surprisingly light. 3 rounds, possibly 4. Excellent. Stellan reached for his emergency distress beacon only to find a molten mass of components where it should have been. He muttered a curse under his breath, running a hand through his short dark hair, and compelled himself to evaluate the situation. Arid landscape. Enormous crystal structures emerging from nearby cave openings that pulsated with a deep crimson glow which appeared unsettlingly organic. Exotic bioluminescent flora illuminated the ground, casting teal and emerald highlights in the gloom. Mountains were visible in the distance, their summits obscured by turbulent clouds swirling with nameless hues. Nowhere in the Galactic Union's database, nowhere on any map he had ever consulted. And then he spotted them. They materialized from the shadows like phantoms made flesh, moving with a supernatural grace that defied conventional physics. 31 figures, all female, all possessing an extraordinary beauty that triggered his combat alarms even as a primitive instinct urged him to relax. Their hair was the shade of starlight platinum blonde and cascaded past their waists, stirred by a warm breeze that had no obvious source. Their ears were tapered to elegant points reminiscent of ancient Earth folklore about elves, yet there was nothing whimsical about their scrutiny of him. Their eyes radiated crimson light, not figuratively, not a trick of the environment. They burned with a bright scarlet luminescence that cut through the darkness. And when the foremost woman offered a smile, Stellan saw fangs. He had his single remaining pistol drawn before his next heartbeat, aimed at the nearest figure. She exhibited no reaction. None of them did. "I would genuinely prefer it if you did not shoot me," the leader articulated, her voice resonating across the distance without any perceptible exertion. "That would be quite discourteous considering we just preserved your existence." Stellan maintained his aim. "Preserved my existence. The gravitational vortex that drew you here would have disintegrated your ship into particles the size of dust." She advanced a step closer, and Stellan observed that her skin had a faint iridescent sheen, capturing the lunar light and reflecting it in subtle blue and silver tones. "We rerouted the energy, attenuated your rate of fall. You are welcome." Behind her, the other 30 women formed a precise semicircle. Some were kneeling, their long hair pooling around them like fluid silver. Others stood with their arms crossed, observing him with expressions ranging from curiosity to something he might have labeled ravenous hunger if he were feeling less hopeful. "Who exactly are you?" Stellan demanded. The leader lowered her head slightly. "I am Thessal, first voice of the Veil, and you are the first living being to crash on Nithar in 847 of your standard years." Stellan processed that information with the cool precision that 3 wars had ingrained in him. "Veilith never encountered your species." Thessal's smile revealed a hint of those delicate fangs. "Most species have not. We are what your people might classify as a legend, a tale told to frighten children about the monsters who drink blood beneath foreign moons." She extended her arms, a gesture that somehow included herself and all 30 companions. "As you can observe, the narratives were not entirely untrue." Stellan did not lower his weapon. "And the detail about consuming blood. A necessity," she stated plainly, "but not in the manner your folklore suggests. We do not murder to sustain ourselves. We share a communion." It is the method by which my people have endured for 12,000 generations on a world that provides no other means of sustenance. Right? Stellan's finger remained on the trigger. And I am expected to simply accept that. Walk directly into whatever situation you have planned and trust that you are feeling benevolent. Thessal's expression flickered with something that might have been amusement or possibly annoyance. It was difficult to determine with a species he had never encountered before. You have limited alternatives, soldier. Your craft is irreparable. Your beacon is destroyed. Nither's atmosphere is breathable for humans, but the nights become intensely cold and there are creatures in the deeper deserts who would find you a far less generous meal than we would be. She paused, allowing the implication of those words to register. Or you can join us. Discover the truth of our identity. And perhaps if the cosmos retains any sense of irony, we might collectively survive what is approaching. Stellan observed her for an extended moment. He had spent 2 decades analyzing individuals, gauging risks, calculating probabilities. Everything in his training shouted that this was an elaborate deception. Yet something in her tone, something in the way those red eyes met his without faltering, conveyed a different narrative. What exactly is approaching? He inquired. Thessal turned to face the horizon where the initial illumination of a second moon was rising. This one the color of fresh gore. We refer to it as the consuming. A phenomenon that occurs once every 900 years. The radiation intensifies. The very air turns toxic. And every living thing on Nither must either find shelter or perish. She looked back at him. The last time it arrived we lost 2/3 of our population. This time we stand to lose everything unless we find a solution to stop it. Stellan finally lowered his pistol. And you believe I can assist with that? Thessal smiled, and this time it held genuine warmth. I believe the universe delivered you here for a purpose, soldier. Whether that purpose benefits you or us or both remains to be determined, but I would rather discover it together than witness you die solitary in the desert. She offered her hand, her pale fingers illuminated by the moonlight. Stellan surveyed the 31 alien women surrounding him, each one beautiful enough to incite conflicts, each one equipped with fangs designed for uses he was desperately trying to avoid contemplating. He looked at the smoking wreckage of his ship. He looked at the alien sky with its impossible colors and its promise of death. Then he secured his pistol and accepted her hand. Fine, he stated, but if anyone attempts to bite me without permission, I will figure out a way to make them regret it. War veteran, remember. I have extensive experience with making people regret things. Thessal chuckled. A sound like silver chimes struck beneath water. I think I am going to enjoy your company, human. My designation is Stellan, he replied. Stellan Vance, formerly a sergeant in the Colonial Marine Corps, forced into retirement roughly 3 years ago when the command decided I had taken sufficient lives for one existence. Thessal inquired, and had you? Stellan met her crimson stare without hesitation. I genuinely cannot say, but I ceased tracking the count after the initial 100, and that felt like an appropriate point to seek alternative employment. Thessal's gaze remained steady, yet a subtle shift occurred in her eyes, perhaps recognition or mutual understanding. We share a great deal in common, Stellan Vance. Come, let me present our dwelling. The journey to the Veal settlement consumed nearly 2 hours, during which Stellan made several key observations. Firstly, the Veal traversed the desert landscape with an effortless liquidity that made his own movements feel like a damaged freighter struggling through thick mud. They appeared to glide over the sand rather than laboring across it, their fitted dark attire rippling with a faint teal luminescence matching the glowing vegetation scattered across the environment. Secondly, they operated with striking organization. As they walked, various members of the group silently detached to execute separate duties without any noticeable instruction. Some advanced as scouts, others positioned themselves in the rear to monitor their path. 2 figures vanished completely, only to re-emerge minutes later from unexpected directions, conveying swift nonverbal reports and soft words to Thessal that he couldn't decipher. Thirdly, and most unsettlingly, they were all observing him, not with overt hostility but with an intense focus that caused the hair on his neck to stand on end, like scientists examining a particularly intriguing specimen or like predators assessing the optimal angle for an attack. You possess queries, Thessal stated, matching his pace. She moved with the same graceful flow as the others, but her demeanor carried a greater gravity, perhaps the burden of command, the responsibility for 30 lives resting on her choices. Stellan scoffed, roughly 1,000 of them. Beginning with how you comprehend my language. We do not, Thessal said, touching a small, nearly invisible implant position behind her pointed ear. Translation technology. Ancient yet functional. My predecessors were not always confined to this planet. We once navigated among the stars much like your species does now. We engaged in commerce, exploration, and constructed marvels that would make your grandest cities appear as children's playthings. She paused, and a shadow crossed her flawless features. Then we incurred the enmity of the wrong civilization, and they pursued us to the brink of annihilation. Those who survived sought refuge here on Nithar where the gravitational anomalies would conceal us from pursuit. 847 years since anyone else crashed, Stellan noted. That constitutes a long duration of isolation. It is, Thessal's voice softened, becoming almost fragile, a contradiction to her formidable appearance. We were never intended for solitude. The Veil are a communal species. We share everything. Thoughts, emotions, memories, blood. She glanced at him, her red eyes catching the moonlight. Without others to connect with, we gradually diminish, lose our sense of self, become empty vessels merely performing the rituals of existence without any inherent purpose. Stellan reflected on the last 3 years of his own life, the succession of pointless jobs, the nights spent contemplating unfamiliar ceilings in cheap transit hostels, the growing realization that he had survived countless battles only to find he lacked the knowledge of how to live without conflict. Yeah, he murmured, I understand that sentiment. Thessal studied him briefly and her expression shifted. Perhaps you do. They reached the summit of a ridge composed of violet sand and Stellan halted abruptly. Below them, nestled within the valley between two colossal crystalline formations, lay the Velith settlement. It was not what he had anticipated, neither a rudimentary camp nor a collection of caves, but a genuine if modestly sized city. Structures carved from the same crimson crystal as the cave outcrops rose in graceful towers and smooth contours. Their surfaces captured the moonlight and scattered it in seemingly deliberate patterns. Gardens of bioluminescent plants formed pools of teal and emerald illumination between the buildings. A central plaza featured a fountain that appeared to flow with liquid silver, although Stellan suspected it was a type of native mineral compound. It was beautiful, yet it was deteriorating. Even from this vantage point, Stellan could discern the damage. Cracks fractured the crystal walls, entire sections of buildings had collapsed and remained unrepaired, gardens had been neglected or worse had ceased growth altogether. The Velith settlement appeared like a body still breathing but resigned to decline. The consuming, Thessal said, her gaze following his. Each cycle takes a greater toll, and with each cycle we have fewer individuals left to reconstruct. There were over 3,000 Velith residing here when my grandmother was born. Now there are 31. Stellan calculated mentally. That's over 99% of your population lost in 3 generations. We are aware of the statistics. There was no bitterness in Thessal's tone, only a profound weariness. Some succumbed during the consuming event itself. Others lost the will to persevere and simply faded away. And some, she hesitated, then continued, her voice barely a whisper, some chose to terminate their suffering on their own terms. Stellan remained silent. He had witnessed that level of desperation before in the eyes of soldiers who had seen too much, lost too much. He had experienced it himself during the dark hours following his final combat tour, when the faces of the deceased haunted his sleep. Why disclose this to me, he finally asked. Because you must comprehend what you are involving yourself in. Thessal turned fully toward him, and in the light of the twin moons she looked ancient despite her youthful features. An old spirit in a young form, bearing responsibilities that would have crushed lesser beings. We are not seeking a savior, Stellan Vance. We are not foolish enough to believe that one human can resolve issues that have plagued us for centuries, but we are searching for hope, and sometimes hope manifests in unexpected forms. She began the descent toward the settlement, her platinum hair trailing behind her like a banner yielding to the wind. Stellan watched her go for a moment, then followed. He had no clue what he was getting into, but for the first time in 3 years he felt the peculiar sense that his continued survival might actually matter to someone besides himself. It wasn't a comforting sensation, but it was something. The assimilation of Stellan Vance into Velith society did not progress smoothly, and no rational person expected it to. He was after all an outsider in the most literal sense, a being from beyond the stars whose blood was not meant to sustain them and whose mind was inaccessible to their collective consciousness. He could not perceive their thoughts or participate in their shared memories. He could not engage in the blood rituals that formed the bedrock of Velith social connections. In the most fundamental respects he was alone amongst them. But Stellan had been isolated before. He was adept at it. What he was not adept at was inactivity. By the 3rd day after his arrival he had already commenced cataloging every detail he could observe regarding Velith technology. Their crystalline buildings were more than decorative. The crimson mineral constituting them served as both structural support and energy reservoir, drawing power from Nithar's intense radiation and converting it into a usable form for the Velith. Their clothing was crafted from a fibrous plant found in the deeper caverns, and it was not merely aesthetic. The teal luminescence functioned as a mode of communication, enabling them to transmit emotions and intentions to each other over distances. You are recording data, a voice noted from behind him. Stellan did not startle. He had detected her approach even though she moved like a ghost. The Velith were silent, but he was learning their patterns. This one slightly favored her left foot, a nearly undetectable imbalance that most would overlook. He turned to face her. She was younger than Thessal, though with the Velith he was discovering age was hard to ascertain. Her platinum hair was cut shorter than most of her sisters, reaching just below her shoulders, and her red eyes held a spark of inquisitiveness that distinguished her from the more reserved demeanor of the others. "Kalira," he stated, recognizing her. "You were assigned to watch over me the first night. I was tasked with ensuring you did not attempt to flee or cause self-harm." She moved closer, peering at the object in his hands. It was a basic tablet rescued from his ship's debris, one of the few functional pieces of equipment remaining. "What are you documenting?" "Everything." Stellan angled the screen so she could view his notes. "Your technology, your social framework, your agricultural methods, anything that might prove useful." "Useful for what?" Stellan shrugged. "I don't know yet. That's the entire point. In the military we termed it intelligence gathering. You learn everything possible about a situation before deciding on a course of action. Otherwise you end up dead, or worse, you get others killed." Kalira considered this thought for a moment. "You discussed death very casually for someone who appears determined to avoid it." "War taught me that death is neither casual nor avoidable," Stellan replied. "It simply exists. The only factor you control is whether you face it standing upright or lying prone." A faint smile touched Kalira's pale features. "And you prefer to stand." "I've done enough lying down. It becomes tedious." She laughed, a clear sound that seemed to surprise even herself. The other women had described Stellan as detached, calculating, a soldier who viewed them as potential adversaries rather than potential allies. But there was a warmth beneath that pragmatic exterior, deeply hidden yet unmistakably present. "May I pose a query to you?" Kalira asked. "You just did something else then." Stellan gestured for her to continue. "The blood, our necessity for it. Does it instill fear in you?" Stellan contemplated the question seriously before responding. He had learned over the years that truthful answers, even uncomfortable ones, fostered greater trust than pleasant falsehoods. "Yes," he said finally. "The concept of any creature that sustains itself on blood will instinctively trigger certain responses in most species. Self-preservation is innate." He held her crimson gaze steadily. "But I have witnessed soldiers commit acts far more monstrous than drinking blood to survive. I have committed acts more monstrous. So no, I will not pretend you are demons simply because your biology functions differently from mine." Kalira was quiet for a long moment. Then she inquired, "What deeds have you committed?" Stellan looked away toward the crimson crystal walls of the settlement, which glowed faintly in the perpetual dim light. "Actions I believed were essential at the time. Actions I convinced myself were justified by the circumstances. Actions that ultimately proved to be neither essential nor justified, just easier than finding an alternative path." He shook his head. "I was extremely skilled at killing Kalira. So skilled they kept deploying me again and again until I forgot how to do anything else. And when I finally recognized what I had become, it was too late to undo any of it." "You experience remorse," she said softly. "Every single day. Then you are not the monster you believe yourself to be." Kalira reached out and touched his arm, her pale fingers cool against his sun-darkened skin. "Monsters do not feel remorse. Monsters do not search for ways to be helpful when they could simply ensure their own survival. Monsters do not spend 3 days inventorying the technology of aliens who could have terminated them in their sleep." Stellan found himself smiling despite the gravity of the conversation. "You are remarkably philosophical for someone who attempted to consume my blood on the second night." "I did not attempt," Kalira corrected precisely. "I requested permission which you declined and which I respected. There is a distinction." "Fair enough." Their discussion was interrupted by a disturbance near the central plaza. Shouts of alarm, the rapid fluttering motion of the V-Lithe, and beneath it all a sound. Stellan immediately recognized the deep grinding sound of catastrophic equipment failure. He reacted before his conscious mind registered the event, muscle memory propelling him towards the source of the noise. Kalira effortlessly matched his stride, her expression transitioning from gentle warmth to intense focus. They arrived at a gathering surrounding one of the larger crystalline structures which Stellan had concluded functioned as a combined power generation and water purification station. Smoke billowed from ventilation ports near its base, and the crystal's inherent crimson luminescence had adopted an angry intermittent quality signifying impending disaster. Thessal stood at the front of the assembled group, her stance radiating controlled urgency. "The filtration core," she announced as Stellan pushed through to reach her. "The containment seals have failed. If we fail to repair them within the next few minutes, the entire mechanism will collapse and we will lose our clean water reserve." Stellan evaluated the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had spent years maintaining military gear in hostile environments. "How many of your people possess the engineering expertise?" he questioned. Thessal's expression preempted her verbal reply. "3 of us possess the knowledge. 2 perished during the last consuming cycle. The third, Orin, is inside now, but she reports the damage exceeds her capacity for repair." "Take me to her," Stellan commanded. Thessal hesitated only momentarily before assenting and guiding him toward the structure's entrance. The other Velites separated to allow them passage, their red eyes tracking Stellan with a mixture of hope and skepticism, a look he found strangely familiar. He had seen the identical expression on the faces of civilian refugees watching approaching soldiers, unsure whether salvation or destruction was drawing near. The building's interior was intensely hot, filled with caustic smoke that irritated Stellan's eyes. Crystal machinery hummed and clicked around him, far more complex than the exterior had implied. And at the epicenter, a Velith woman knelt before a massive cylindrical apparatus that Stellan identified as a form of centrifugal separator. Orinda looked up as they approached. Her platinum hair was singed at the ends and dark fluid stained her pale hands. She was older than the other Velites Stellan had encountered. Lines of age and fatigue were etched into her beautiful features, but her red eyes burned with the frustrated resolve of someone who refused to accept defeat. "The casing fractured," she stated abruptly. "The seal is lost and I lack any replacement substance that can endure the internal pressure and temperature." Stellan moved closer, examining the damaged mechanism. The centrifugal separator operated on principles remarkably similar to equipment he had utilized during his military service, merely constructed from unfamiliar materials. The underlying engineering, however, was universal. "What temperatures are we dealing with?" he asked. Orinda blinked, clearly surprised by his inquiry. 400 degrees standard, potentially higher during peak operation. Stellan nodded, his thoughts racing through potential solutions. "And the pressure?" "Approximately 3 times your standard atmospheric pressure. The crystal normally contains it, but with the cracked casing it leaks out and the entire system becomes unstable." Stellan retrieved his salvaged tablet, pulling up the inventory of components he had catalogued from the Ironwood's wreckage. "What about chemical compatibility? If I locate a material that can withstand the heat and pressure, would it adhere to your crystal matrix?" Orinda gazed at him as if he had proposed something profoundly alien, which Stellan conceded he had. "Our crystal does not bond with foreign substances. It possesses a distinct molecular signature that..." She trailed off, her eyes widening slightly as a realization struck her. "The blood compound," she whispered. "The what now?" "Our blood," she clarified, speaking rapidly as the concept solidified. "It contains a bonding agent, a molecular bridge that enables disparate substances to integrate with our crystalline structures. It is how we mend injuries, how we repair damage to ourselves. If we could apply it to a foreign material, would it function? I do not know. It has never been attempted." Stellan looked at the smoking machinery, then back at Orinda. "Is there any inherent risk in trying?" She hesitated. "The blood compound requires a living donor. It cannot be artificially synthesized or stored. Someone would need to donate their own to facilitate the attempt." "How much blood are we talking about for a repair of this magnitude?" Orinda's expression was grim. "More than any of us can safely spare. The last consuming weakened us all. None of our people possess the necessary reserves to draw upon." Stellan fell silent for a long moment. Then he began rolling up his sleeve. "Use mine," he said. Every Velith in the chamber turned to stare at him. Even Thessal, who had maintained her composure throughout the crisis, appeared genuinely shocked. "Your blood is unlike ours," she warned cautiously. "We cannot guarantee it will work. We cannot guarantee it won't kill you." "No," Stellan agreed. "We don't know. But we do know what happens if we take no action. Your water supply fails. Your people weaken further. When the consuming arrives, you will lack the strength to survive it." He met Thessal's crimson gaze without flinching. "I have spent the last 3 years searching for something worth dying for. If this is it, then at least I perish attempting to save lives instead of taking them." The silence extended for what seemed like hours, though it was likely only seconds. Then Thessal stepped forward and took his hand. "We do not demand this of you," she said softly. "You do not have to ask. I am offering." Thessal scrutinized his face for a long time, discerning something in his expression that seemed to satisfy her. "Very well," she conceded finally. "Orinda, prepare the integration chamber. We will attempt a synthesis." What followed was one of the most bizarre experiences of Stellan's life, which was saying something considering his history. The integration chamber was a smaller crystalline annex adjacent to the main filtration system, and inside he found himself surrounded by dozens of Veil women, all focused on him with an intensity that would have been unnerving had he allowed himself to dwell on it. Orinda explained the procedure as she worked. The blood compound was extracted using a specialized apparatus that continuously drew small amounts rather than extracting a large volume at once. This extract was then combined with a crystalline powder, which Stellan deduced was a mineral catalyst, creating a thick luminous paste that could be applied to the damaged casing. The process took hours. Stellan felt the gradual depletion from the blood loss, the resulting lightheadedness, but he had endured worse, far worse. He concentrated on maintaining steady breathing, a calm heart rate, and tried to ignore the 31 pairs of red eyes watching him with an expression he was starting to recognize as something far more intricate than hunger. It was respect, and perhaps, if he wasn't mistaken, gratitude. "It's functioning," Orinda announced, genuine awe in her voice. "The molecular bridge is establishing itself. Your blood is compatible with our crystalline matrix." Stellan managed a faint smile. "Glad to know I'm useful for something besides violence." Thessal moved to stand beside him, her cool hand resting on his forehead. "You have given us more than you comprehend, Stellan Vance. Not merely your blood, but something we had lost. Hope. The conviction that tomorrow might differ from today." The repairs required another 3 hours to finalize, by which time Stellan was weak enough that he had to be carried back to his quarters by 2 of the younger Velith. He drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of cool hands tending to him, soft voices speaking in a language the translator could not fully capture, the strange sensation of being cared for by beings he had only just met days prior. When he finally awoke fully, he found Kalira sitting next to him, watching him with those luminous red eyes. "How long?" he asked, his voice rough. 14 hours. She handed him a container of water, which he consumed gratefully. "You almost died. Your species does not regenerate blood as rapidly as ours." "Worth it." Kalira smiled. And for the first time Stellan saw no trace of predatory intent in her expression. Only warmth, only connection. "The filtration system is fully operational. Orinda believes it will endure for years, perhaps decades." "You saved us." "I bought you time," Stellan corrected. "The consuming is still approaching. We still need to find a way to halt it." Kalira repeated softly. Stellan met her gaze. "I reached a firm conclusion when I donated my blood. I am uncertain if your people accept non-natives, but I am staying. Not until this situation is resolved one way or another." Kalira leaned in and gently touched her lips to his forehead, a gesture of thanks, or maybe a blessing, or perhaps something entirely different. "Then you must rest, Stellan Vance. Tomorrow we commence strategizing, and for the first time in centuries we will not strategize in isolation." The subsequent weeks drastically altered Stellan's understanding of the Velith and their world. He dedicated himself entirely to studying the consuming, analyzing the radiation signatures, the geological data, anything that might offer clues into the phenomenon threatening their destruction. The Velith in return revealed themselves to him in ways that surpassed simple collaboration. They shared their history, their societal norms, their hopes and their griefs. Stellan learned that each of the 31 women possessed a narrative, a distinct viewpoint forged by ages of survival against insurmountable adversity. Thessal, the sovereign who had witnessed her own mother succumb after the last consuming and had vowed to prevent the same fate from claiming her people. Orinda, the engineer whose brilliant intellect had sustained their technology far past its intended operational life. Kalira, the youngest of the adult cohort born during the last consuming and who had never experienced a period when her people were not dwindling. And there were others. Vanya, whose talent for cultivating the bioluminescent gardens had provided food when other sources failed. Sareth, the keeper of records, who maintained meticulous accounts of every Velith who had lived and died since their banishment began. Oriel, who possessed an almost innate ability to sense the planet's disposition and forecast hazardous weather events. Each of them was remarkable in her own right. And each of them, Stellan finally realized, was looking at him with an expression he was at last beginning to comprehend. It was not merely respect or appreciation. It was interconnectedness. The identical bond the Veal shared among themselves now extended to embrace him. He was becoming integrated into their family, their community, their aspiration for the future. The pivotal insight occurred during one of his late-night research sessions within the ancient vault that functioned as the Velith library. Thessal found him there, surrounded by crystalline data tablets and holographic visualizations of Nither's geological past. "You should be asleep," she remarked, settling gracefully into the chair opposite him. "So should you," Stellan countered. "Leaders do not possess the luxury of sleep when their people are in peril. Neither do soldiers." Thessal smiled, an expression that had become familiar to him over the weeks. "Is that still how you categorize yourself? A soldier?" Stellan considered the question thoughtfully. "I am unsure what else I could be. Combat is the only thing I have ever known." "That is inaccurate." Thessal leaned closer, her red eyes catching the light from the holographic displays. "I have observed you, Stellan. When you repaired the filtration system, you were not fighting. When you instructed Vanya on methods to enhance her garden yields, you were not fighting. When you sat with Sareth for hours listening to the histories of Velith who perished before your birth, you were not fighting." She reached across the table and grasped his hand. "You are capable of far more than destruction. You have simply never permitted yourself to explore it." Stellan stared at their joined hands, her pale skin against his sun-weathered bronze. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "but the consuming is still approaching, and when it arrives, fighting might be the only thing that matters. Perhaps we will discover a different solution." Thessal squeezed his hand gently. Regardless, you will not face it alone. The breakthrough arrived 6 weeks following Stellan's arrival, and it originated from an unexpected source. Oriel, the expert in planetary sensory data, had noticed something peculiar about the approaching consuming event. The radiation patterns were not arbitrary as had always been assumed. They followed a specific trajectory originating from a point deep within Nither's largest mountain range. "It is not natural," she reported during an urgent council meeting. "The consuming is not a geological phenomenon. It is being generated by something." Stellan felt his tactical mind activate with a familiar click. Generated by what? "I do not know, but the energy signatures align with the same technology that powers our city. Ancient crystalline machinery. Potentially a weapon abandoned by the enemies who forced us onto this world." The implication struck Stellan like a physical impact. If the consuming was artificial, it could potentially be deactivated. Not merely endured, not simply survived. Deactivated. "We must locate it," he declared, already forming strategies. "Pinpoint the source and neutralize it." "The mountain range is 300 kilometers away," Thessal pointed out, "traversing some of the most treacherous terrain on Nither. Even at our speed, the journey would require weeks, and the consuming begins in less than 10 days. Then we depart immediately." The expedition was organized within hours. 12 Velites selected for their specialized skills and resilience would accompany Stellan across the desert to the mountains. They carried rations salvaged from the settlement and the ironwood's debris, enough to sustain them for the journey, assuming nothing went wrong. Of course, something always went wrong. They maintained excellent progress for the first 5 days, traversing the violet sands at a speed that even surprised the Velith. Stellan had undergone training for severe environments during his military tenure, and while he could not match their supernatural velocity and stamina, he managed to keep pace far better than any of them had anticipated. "You are remarkable," Thessal commented one evening as they rested in the shadow of a massive crystal formation. "For a species that developed without the pressures we endured, you are impressively adaptable." Stellan shrugged. "Humans are stubborn. We dislike being told we cannot achieve something." "Is that why you became a soldier? Because someone claimed you couldn't?" "No, I became a soldier because I was young and foolish and believed that fighting for a cause would imbue my life with meaning." He gazed out at the desert, watching the twin moons ascend. "By the time I recognized that most causes are lies propagated by the powerful to persuade the powerless to die for them, it was too late to choose differently. And now I am attempting to fight for something that genuinely matters." He looked at her, meeting those crimson eyes that no longer appeared foreign or menacing. "I am trying to fight for your people, for you." Thessal held his gaze for a long moment. Then she leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, tentative touch laden with centuries of isolation seeking connection. "I have not permitted myself to hope for anything beyond survival in a very long time," she whispered when they separated. "But you inspire me to desire more." The ambush occurred on the 7th day. Stellan never saw the creatures that attacked them. They erupted from beneath the sand, massive predators with bodies like armored snakes and jaws filled with crystalline teeth that could tear through Velith flesh like paper. They struck with animal cunning, first targeting the expedition's supplies, destroying their food and water before the Velith could react. "Defensive formation," Thessal commanded, and her people responded with the fluid synchronization of beings who shared thoughts. But Stellan could not share their thoughts. He was isolated in his own mind, relying on intuition and training to keep himself alive. He drew the single functional weapon he had salvaged from the ironwood, a compact energy pistol with limited charges, and opened fire on the closest creature. The blast struck it in what passed for a face, and it emitted a shriek that made Stellan's teeth ache, but it did not halt its advance. If anything, it seemed enraged, diverting its attention from the supplies to focus on the human who had wounded it. "Stellan, fall back," Kalira shouted, but he was already moving, drawing the creature away from the rest of the group. 3 more blasts, each finding its mark, each inflicting damage but insufficient to stop the behemoth. His pistol whined, its energy reserves exhausted. Stellan discarded it and pulled the knife he wore on his belt. A simple blade that seemed ridiculously inadequate against a monster the size of a ground transport. But ridiculous or not, it was all he possessed. The creature lunged. Stellan evaded, raising his knife in a sweeping arc that sliced a shallow wound along its flank. Dark fluid spilled onto the sand. The beast shrieked and twisted faster than something of that bulk should have been capable of moving, and its tail whipped across Stellan's chest, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, the impact forcefully expelling the air from his lungs. The world spun, fading at the edges. He heard screaming Velith voices raised in distress, and then a heavy weight on his chest as the creature towered over him, its jaws gaping wide. "No!" a voice shrieked. When Stellan's vision cleared, he found himself lying on the sand, surrounded by the scorched remnants of the creature that had almost killed him. Standing over him was Thessal, her hand extended and luminous, the light slowly diminishing. Her expression was one of profound shock, as if she had just executed an action she was previously unaware she was capable of. What was that? Stellan managed to articulate. I don't know, Thessal replied, looking at her own hand as though seeing it for the first time. I sensed you fading. I felt the connection between us, the bond we have forged, and I refused to permit its severance. She gestured towards the destroyed beast. And then this. The remaining predators had vanished, driven away by whatever power Thessal had suddenly unleashed. The expedition reorganized, tallying injuries and assessing losses. They had lost most of their supplies and 3 of the Velites sustained injuries, but everyone was alive. Can you replicate it? Stellan asked as Kalira assisted him back to his feet. Thessal shook her head, uncertainty clouding her features. I have no idea. I don't even comprehend how I achieved it the initial time. Stellan observed her for a lengthy moment. Then he smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his rugged features. Well then, I suppose we just discovered another source of hope. They reached the mountains 4 days later, bruised and weary yet driven by resolve. The entrance to the ancient complex was exactly where Oriel's projections had indicated. A massive doorway carved into the natural rock, sealed with technology that had been dormant for millennia. Stellan examined the seal, utilizing every bit of engineering knowledge he possessed. It is activated by crystalline resonance, he announced finally. The identical frequency your blood emits. Thessal nodded slowly. Then we can open it. The procedure spanned hours. One by one the Velith pressed their palms to the ancient entryway, each contributing her resonance to the unified signal. Stellan could not participate, but he stood alongside them, offering encouragement, reassurance, and the simple presence of someone who believed in their efforts. When the door finally yielded, they found themselves in a chamber of overwhelming proportions. Machinery rose around them, crystalline structures the size of buildings humming with an energy that had been accumulating for centuries. And at the heart of it all, a device that Stellan instantly recognized for what it was. A weapon engineered to generate radiation bursts capable of sterilizing an entire planet left behind by adversaries who aimed to ensure the Velith would never recover, never rebuild, would simply dwindle away over generations until nothing remained. Can we deactivate it? Kalira asked. Stellan studied the apparatus, tracing power conduits and control systems with a practiced eye. Yes, he stated finally, but not by shutting it down. The safeguard protocols are too intricate. We would require years to bypass them all, and we only have hours. Then what course of action do we take? Stellan looked at Thessal, and in her red eyes he saw the same tenacity that had sustained her people through centuries of hardship. We retarget it. The energy is already primed, already building towards release. We cannot stop it, but we can alter its destination. To where? Stellan pointed upward toward the chamber ceiling and the sky beyond. Anywhere but here. The device was designed to target a planetary body. We will reprogram it to target empty space. Allow the consuming to discharge harmlessly into the void. The reprogramming demanded everything they possessed. Every piece of knowledge that Stellan and Orin the held, combined with the crystalline resonance of every Velith present. As they labored, the countdown to discharge continued, the weapon building towards a release that would either destroy them or secure their survival. In the final moments, as the device prepared to fire, Thessal reached out and clasped Stellan's hand. Whatever the outcome, she said softly, you have given us something we had lost. A reason to trust in tomorrow. Stellan squeezed her hand. Tomorrow hasn't arrived yet. The weapon discharged. For a terrifying instant, the world consisted only of light and deafening sound and the overwhelming presence of energy beyond human comprehension. Stellan felt the discharge surge through him. Felt the crystalline technology responding to the Velith resonance. Felt the trajectory shift from planetary devastation to empty space. And then silence. When he opened his eyes, the chamber was dark. The weapon had ceased operation, its stored energy depleted, its lethal purpose neutralized. Around him the Velith were stirring, their red eyes opening one by one as they realized they were still alive. We succeeded, Kalira breathed. Thessal pulled Stellan into an embrace, her cool arms wrapping around him with a strength that belied her slender form. We succeeded, she confirmed. Because of you. Because you refused to accept that our narrative was concluded. The return journey to the settlement took 2 weeks, slowed by injuries and exhaustion but lightened by a profound joy that the Veil had not experienced in generations. They were greeted at the city's edge by every remaining woman, all gathered to welcome home the expedition that had secured their future. In the days that followed, Stellan found himself at the center of a celebration that showed no signs of abating. The Velith danced, sang, and wept with happiness, and everywhere he went they reached out to touch him, to thank him, to simply be near the human who had restored their optimism. But it was Thessal who found him on the balcony overlooking the city, watching the twin moons ascend over a world that would now have a future. What occupies your thoughts? She asked, settling beside him. Stellan contemplated the question. I am thinking that I spent 30 years seeking a purpose, a reason to exist beyond mere survival. He turned to look at her, this alien woman who had become something far more significant than he had ever anticipated. I'm thinking that I finally found it. Thessal smiled, her fangs catching the moonlight. And what precisely is that purpose? You, Stellan said simply, your people. This world. He reached out and took her hand. I do not know what the future holds. I do not know if further challenges await or if we have earned some respite. But I know that I wish to face whatever comes with you. If you will have me. Thessal's response was not verbal but in action. She kissed him beneath Nither's twin moons, and in that instant two worlds became one. Years passed as they inevitably do, and the world of Nither transformed in ways no one could have foreseen. The settlement expanded, growing beyond its ancient limits as the Velith recovered their strength and their population. Children were born, hybrids of human and Velith, blending the best attributes of both species in forms that were utterly unique and breathtakingly beautiful. Stellan stood on the same balcony where Thessal had first kissed him, watching his daughters play in the garden below. They had inherited their mother's platinum hair and their father's bronze skin, and their eyes glowed with a crimson light that seemed softer, somehow less predatory and more inquiring. You are smiling, Thessal observed, joining him at the railing. That is still noteworthy enough to mention. I am happy, Stellan replied. That used to be unusual enough to be impossible. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. What changed everything? He wrapped an arm around her. I crash-landed on an alien planet. I was rescued by vampires. I gave my blood to save strangers and fought monsters in the desert and helped deactivate an ancient weapon from destroying the only people who ever made me feel like I belonged somewhere. His smile widened. All things considered, a pretty standard retirement. Thessal laughed. That sound like silver bells that he had come to cherish above all else. And you harbor no regrets. Stellan watched his children, watched the Veal women who had become family, watched the city that had become home. Not one, he said. Not a single one. Below them, a young Veal woman, one of his daughters, looked up and waved, her face illuminated with joy. Stellan waved back, feeling a warmth in his chest he had never expected to discover. He had arrived on Nither as a damaged individual, a soldier without a conflict, a survivor without a reason to persist. He had found something far more precious than purpose. He had discovered affection. He had found kinship. He had located home. And as the twin moons ascended over the crystalline metropolis, Stellan Vance recognized that sometimes the most significant conflicts were those that concluded not in triumph or failure but in something infinitely more precious: tranquility. The news disseminated throughout the galaxy slowly, as such tidings always do. A human combat veteran, presumed deceased after his patrol vessel disappeared near the Outer Veil, had not merely survived but had encountered something extraordinary. A species believed to be extinct, a world assumed barren, a future deemed impossible. Vessels began arriving 3 years after the consuming was vanquished. Initially scientists eager to analyze the Velith and their unique biology. Then diplomats seeking to forge relationships with a species that had remained concealed from the galaxy for millennia. Then settlers, humans who looked at Nither's crystal cities and saw not foreign architecture but potential dwellings. Thessal managed the influx with the identical composure she brought to all endeavors. She established guidelines for visitors. She instructed her people on how to engage with species that did not share their communal bond and ensured that the Velith would never again face the isolation that had almost eradicated them. Yet it was Stellan who became the interspecies connector. He stood within the council chamber addressing representatives from a dozen civilizations who had undertaken the voyage to Nither. His uniform was replaced by Velith attire that seamlessly blended human utility with alien grace. His hair had silvered at the temples, a subtle reminder that even the blood connection he shared with Thessal could not halt the march of time entirely. We are not seeking assimilation, he explained to the assembled delegates. We are not requesting re-entry into galactic society as it currently operates. What we are offering is distinct. A new paradigm, a way of living that prioritizes connection over rivalry, community over conquest. A Turan ambassador, her scales reflecting the crystal light, raised a skeptical claw. And what leads you to believe such a model is viable? History demonstrates that species compete. It is inherent to survival. History also demonstrates that species cooperate, Stellan countered. It is inherent to survival when rivalry becomes too destructive. He gestured toward the crystalline walls surrounding them. The Velith endured for millennia in isolation. They could have continued to survive that way, but they chose to open their world because they understood that survival without connection is not true living. It is merely existing. Kalira stepped forward, her status as Thessal's second-in-command highlighted by the intricate luminous patterns on her clothing. We do not ask you to abandon your customs, she said softly. We only ask you to consider that there may be alternative paths, that the future need not be written in blood and domination. The deliberations continued for hours, as such discussions always do, but Stellan noticed a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The skepticism persisted, yet it was now moderated by curiosity, by hope, by the same fragile possibility that had sustained the V-Life through their darkest eras. When the session finally concluded, Thessal found him standing at the observation window watching the sunset paint the crystal city in hues of gold and crimson. "You were magnificent," she said. "I was adequate," he smiled wearily. "You were magnificent. Kalira was magnificent. I merely spoke words. Words possess power." She moved to stand beside him, her platinum hair catching the fading light. "You taught me that. When you first arrived you spoke of fighting being your only knowledge, of violence being your sole tool." She took his hand. "Observe what you have become. A diplomat, a father, a bridge between worlds. That is not the work of a soldier." Stellan considered her words. "Perhaps not, but it is the work of a survivor. And I finally comprehend that surviving entails more than staying alive. It means constructing something worth existing for." Their daughters found them there as the stars emerged, bursting into the room with the energy that only children possess. The eldest, Alina, had her mother's refined features and her father's unyielding resolve. The youngest, Brainia, combined Stellan's practical mindset with Thessal's gift for leadership. "The ambassadors wish to know if they may visit the gardens," Alina announced breathlessly. "Aunt Vania said she would show them the bioluminescent flowers if you permit it." Thessal laughed. "Of course they may visit. Stellan, would you accompany them? You possess a knack for making outsiders feel welcome. Learn from the best." He kissed her cheek, then allowed his daughters to pull him toward the door. "I'm coming." The years continued to elapse, each one bringing new obstacles and new achievements. Nithar became a beacon of hope across the galaxy. Proof that even the most fractured things could be repaired, that even the most isolated species could find connection. Stellan observed it all unfold from his position at Thessal's side, marveling at the distance they had traveled. He was no longer a soldier or a survivor or even a bridge between worlds. He was simply a man who had discovered his place, surrounded by family, purpose, and love. On the anniversary of his crash landing 30 years after the Ironwood had plummeted from the sky, Stellan returned to the location where everything had begun. The wreckage was long gone, salvaged and repurposed by V-Life engineers. But the crystal formations remained pulsating with their eternal crimson light. Thessal found him there as she always did. "Remembering?" she asked. "Celebrating," he corrected. 30 years ago I was a shattered man falling toward a world I had never heard of. I believed my life was finished." He turned to face her, his silver-touched hair catching the moonlight. "I had no idea it was just starting." Thessal smiled, her red eyes warm with affection and decades of shared experiences. "And now I understand something I never did before." He took her hand, feeling the familiar cool touch of her pale skin. "The universe is vast and strange and sometimes terrifying, but it is also abundant with possibilities, overflowing with second chances, rich with love if you are willing to look for it." The twin moons ascended behind them, illuminating the desert in shades of silver and blue. In the distance the crystal city glowed with vitality, filled with humans and V-Life and the children they had created together. Stellan Vance, former soldier, veteran of 3 colonial wars, survivor of 17 combat drops and 1 very unusual crash landing, held his wife's hand and watched the stars revolve overhead. And he smiled. Because sometimes, against all improbability and logic and expectation, the universe provides you with precisely what you require. Not what you requested, not what you anticipated, but exactly what you needed.